When James noticed tiny black bugs crawling across his son Max's bed sheets, he assumed they were ordinary bedbugs. But when the pest control expert arrived and saw them up close, his blood-curdling scream echoed through the house. These weren't bedbugs at all. They were something far more sinister. The trouble began on a quiet Sunday evening in late October. Max, James's 10-year-old son, couldn't stop scratching during dinner. His mother, Diana, noticed the red marks on his arms but figured they were just mosquito bites. After all, the weather had been hot for autumn, and they'd left the windows open most evenings. "Maybe we should close the windows tonight," Diana suggested, watching Max push his food around his plate. She exchanged worried glances with James across the table. Their son had barely touched his favorite lasagna, which he usually devoured enthusiastically. But the windows weren't the problem. They couldn't have known that the true threat had already entered their home, hiding in the dark corners of their peaceful home. They started closing the windows each night, hoping it would solve the problem. But Max's symptoms only intensified. Over the next few days, Max's condition deteriorated rapidly. The itching became unbearable, and the welts on his skin grew bigger and redder. Diana tried everything: calamine lotion, anti-itch cream, and even oatmeal baths. Nothing seemed to help. What made it worse was that Max had started having nightmares, terrible dreams about tiny black creatures crawling under his skin. "Dad, look!" Max called out one morning, his voice trembling. James rushed upstairs to find his son standing beside his bed, pointing at the sheets with shaking fingers. There, moving across the white cotton fabric, were several small black insects. They weren't much bigger than sesame seeds, but something about their movement made James's skin crawl. They didn't scatter like normal bugs when exposed to light. Instead, they moved in strange, almost purposeful patterns. James pulled out his phone and opened his browser, determined to figure out what these creatures were. While researching bedbugs that evening, James discovered something that made his blood run cold. A news article from 3 months ago detailed a series of mysterious incidents in a small Eastern European town. The story described how a centuries-old furniture warehouse had been suddenly abandoned after workers reported strange insect infestations. The local authorities quarantined the building, but not before several pieces had been shipped internationally. James's hands trembled as he scrolled through the translated article. The warehouse specialized in restoring and selling antique furniture, particularly academic pieces like desks and writing tables. Every detail matched the listing he'd found 2 months ago. The intricate carvings of scholarly figures that had caught his eye, the rich dark wood that had convinced him it was a bargain at that price, even the seller's flowery promise of scholarly inspiration that had sealed his decision to buy it for Max. He remembered how excited they'd both been when the desk arrived. The article mentioned that several workers had been hospitalized with unusual symptoms. Their injuries weren't just typical bug bites. They described sensations of movement and unexplained marks appearing on their skin. Children who came in contact with the infected furniture showed disturbing behavioral changes. With growing dread, James looked toward Max's room and the beautiful antique desk, his gift to his son. Could the desk James had bought for Max be the source of this trouble? The next morning, James's hands shook as he dialed the first pest control company. The cheerful receptionist's voice turned hesitant when he described the strange movement patterns of the insects. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're booked for 2 weeks." 3 more calls yielded similar results, with one operator abruptly hanging up. His desperation grew, and he found himself scrolling through increasingly obscure listings, calling smaller operations he normally would have avoided. By his 9th call, James's voice had taken on a pleading edge. That's when he found Tom Richards' website, which has a professional layout and impressive credentials. What caught his eye wasn't just the 24/7 emergency response banner at the top, but the unusual testimonials mentioning discreet handling of sensitive situations and expertise with unusual cases. Tom Richards had been in the pest control business for over 2 decades. He'd handled everything from rat infestations to wasp nests, and his website proudly proclaimed him the city's leading bedbug expert. However, a small note at the bottom of Tom's credentials caught James's attention: specialized training in exotic pest identification and containment. When James finally got through to Tom's direct line, the pest controller's response was markedly different from the others. Instead of dismissing his concerns or making excuses, Tom listened intently to every detail, asking precise questions about the insect's behavior and Max's symptoms. His voice grew more serious with each answer, and by the end of the call, he had cleared his entire morning schedule. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Tom said firmly. "And Mr. James, don't let anyone enter that room until I arrive." When Tom arrived, he had the confident air of someone who'd seen it all. As he set up his equipment, He asked oddly specific questions. Had they received any imported goods recently? Had they noticed any unusual patterns in the insect's behavior? Had anyone else in the neighborhood reported similar problems? Everything changed when Tom shined his specialized UV light on Max's bed. The bugs didn't just show up under the light, they glowed, and their movements became even more deliberate. Tom's professional demeanor vanished in an instant. The flashlight slipped from his fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. He stumbled backward, his face turning ash white. The expert screamed in horror after realizing what they truly were. "Oh my God," he whispered, then shouted. "Everyone out of the house, now!" Tom's voice cracked with urgency. "Don't touch anything or take anything from the house, just get out!" What happened next revealed that Tom wasn't just a pest control expert. He was part of a covert government task force that had been tracking similar incidents across the country. He was a Level 4 containment team member, a specialized unit dedicated to handling biological anomalies. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, rapidly punching in what looked like a coded sequence. "This is Agent Tom, Code Crimson at 1242 Maple Street. I need immediate containment and medical support. Possible Type 7 exposure, juvenile subject." James and Diana stood frozen until Tom physically pushed them toward the stairs. "Your son needs immediate medical attention. There's a special facility." He paused, glancing around nervously. "Look, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I'm part of a government task force that deals with biological anomalies. These aren't ordinary insects. They're something we've been tracking for months, something that shouldn't exist." Within minutes, black SUVs with tinted windows screeched to a halt outside their house. Men in hazmat suits swarmed the property while a medical team whisked Max into an ambulance. James and Diana followed in their car, led by a government escort with flashing lights. They were taken to a facility on the outskirts of the town. While Max was being treated at the facility, James and Diana discovered they weren't alone in their nightmare. In the sterile waiting room, they met Ava, whose daughter Emma had encountered similar beetles 3 months earlier in Seattle. "The itching started just like with your son," Ava explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then the nightmares, the strange behaviors. Emma would wake up screaming and itching her body." With trembling hands, Ava pulled out her phone and started swiping through photos. "The itching started just like with your son," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "I documented everything, hoping someone would believe us." The photos made James's stomach turn. They showed the progression of Emma's symptoms, starting with what looked like ordinary bug bites but then becoming something far more sinister. In later photos, angry red welts formed perfect marks across Emma's arms and back, like some kind of bizarre crop circles on human skin. "These appeared before they took her for treatment," Ava said, showing the final photo. James felt Diana's hand tighten. The marks were identical to the ones they'd noticed on Max's arms that morning before Tom arrived. "Emma's treatment is almost finished," Ava continued quietly. "The marks fade once the parasites are eliminated." "How long until Tom's arrival at the facility?" cut off Diana's question. "You need to see this," Tom stated. He led James and Diana through the facility's winding corridors until they reached a large observation window. Through the reinforced glass, they could see Max lying on an examination table, surrounded by doctors in white hazmat suits. Their son looked so small and vulnerable under the harsh medical lights, his skin bearing those strange marks that seemed to shift and change even as they watched. "We've seen this before," Tom said quietly, his breath fogging the glass slightly as he leaned closer. "Similar cases have been appearing across the country, all connected to antique furniture imported from a small Eastern European town." Diana pressed her palm against the glass as if trying to reach through to her son. "How many others?" 17 cases confirmed so far across 3 continents, Tom replied, his voice heavy. "Each one started the same way. An antique desk, a bookshelf, a writing table, all from that same warehouse." James couldn't take his eyes off his son. "But what?" "The insects aren't just spreading. They're evolving, adapting. Each new case shows slightly different patterns." Tom guided them away from the window to a secure briefing room just down the hall. The walls were lined with monitors showing data streams and surveillance feeds from various containment units. Taking seats behind a desk cluttered with files and specimen containers, Tom's expression grew even more serious. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels," he began, pulling out a thick file labeled Cases, 2023 to 2024. "This facility is part of an international network dedicated to containing and studying biological anomalies. We've been tracking these incidents since the first reports came in from Eastern Europe." He spread photographs and medical charts across the desk, each showing children with similar issues to Max's. "The good news is we've learned from each case," Tom continued. The progression, the behaviors, we're starting to understand them, but what we've discovered, he paused, looking up at James and Diana with grave concern. It's going to change everything we thought we knew about biological evolution and human consciousness. Diana's voice shook as she asked, "What exactly are these things doing to our son?" Tom leaned forward, his shoulders hunched with the weight of his words. "They're called Tenebrionidae Sapiens. At least that's our classification for them, but they're not like any beetles we've ever encountered. They don't just infest spaces, they change them, and the people they come in contact with. These insects are drawn to children specifically. We think it has something to do with their developing neurological pathways." He pulled up more images on his tablet showing microscopic views of the insects. "The patterns we've seen in the affected kids." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "They're not random. It's like the insects are trying to communicate something, or worse, trying to change something fundamental in their hosts." Inside the medical facility, specialized doctors worked tirelessly to save Max. "The Tenebrionidae Sapiens are attempting to create some kind of synaptic network through his nervous system," the lead physician announced. The medical team immediately began administering a newly developed treatment, a combination of targeted electromagnetic pulses and a specialized antiparasitic compound derived from studying previous cases. Max drifted in and out of consciousness during the first 3 days of treatment. The medical team monitored him constantly, watching his skin's markings gradually fade. A week later, Max was sitting up in bed. Color returned to his cheeks, showing no lasting effects from his ordeal. The bizarre markings had completely vanished, leaving only faint marks that would fade with time. The medical team had successfully eliminated all traces of the Tenebrionidae Sapiens from his system. "He's going to be fine," the chief medical officer assured James and Diana, smiling as they watched Max laugh at a cartoon on the facility's TV. "His recovery is remarkable. Each time we encounter these creatures, we learn more about how to fight them. Max's case has helped us develop protocols that will save others." Before releasing Max, the facility recommended thoroughly decontaminating the family's home. Back at their house, Tom led a team of specialists through what would become a 3-week decontamination process. Special equipment revealed the full scope of their challenge. The beetles had established a presence far beyond Max's bedroom. Glowing trails showed the beetles had spread to multiple rooms, outlining their movements like a creepy map. "We need to go deeper," Tom announced after the first day of inspection. "These readings suggest they've infiltrated the structural elements." The team began by setting up an advanced containment barrier around the house, a sealed environment that would prevent specimens from escaping during removal. They then installed devices at strategic points, designed to disrupt the beetles' bizarre communication patterns. As they carefully removed sections of drywall, the full extent of the infestation became clear. The beetles had built a network of tunnels. The team treated the house with a special compound that not only killed any remaining beetles, but also made the house unfriendly to future infestations. "We're creating a protective shield," one of the team explained while spraying a shimmering mist in the air. "This stops them from building their networks again." Tom insisted on being thorough. They scanned every part of the house, treated it, and scanned again to ensure nothing was missed. They replaced all the damaged materials with special beetle-resistant alternatives. As they finished, Tom's team checked and confirmed that no trace of the beetles remained. The house was clean and had become an example of how to protect homes from these evolving pests. After the house decontamination, Max was released from the facility. As Max walked out of the facility's sliding glass doors, the morning sun felt different somehow, warmer, more welcoming. His parents' hands were steady in his, and his steps had regained their characteristic bounce. One of the doctors addressed his parents. "Mr. and Mrs. James, please remember to follow all the preventive protocols we discussed. If you notice any unusual patterns or symptoms, contact us immediately through the secure line." The doctor handed them a final folder of documentation while Max stood quietly between his parents, unconsciously rubbing his now clear arms where the marks had once traced their mysterious designs. "We understand completely," Diana assured them. James nodded firmly, his hand protective on Max's shoulder. The drive home was filled with a lightness that had been missing for weeks. James chatted animatedly about setting up his new study space. Tom's team had carefully removed and destroyed the old desk and every other potentially contaminated item during the decontamination process. As they turned onto Maple Street, Max pressed his face against the car window, taking in the familiar sight of their house. It looked exactly the same from the outside, but they all knew it was different now, safer, protected by layers of scientific innovations they barely understood. Tom was waiting for them in the driveway, clipboard in hand. "Everything is all clear," he announced to James and Diana, while Max bounced impatiently nearby. You alert us if anything unusual appears. Max's room was transformed. The walls were freshly painted in his favorite blue. Where the antique desk had once stood, there was now an empty space waiting to be filled with something new, something untainted by the past. As Tom left the house that day, he paused at the doorway, his weathered face softening as he watched Max playing in the living room. Before stepping out, Tom pulled James aside onto the front porch. "You know," Tom said quietly, checking that Max couldn't hear, "in all my years doing this work, your son's case was different. The way he fought back, how quickly he recovered. It's given us valuable data for helping others." He handed James a plain business card with just a phone number. "Keep this, not the official line. This is my personal number. Any concerns, day or night, you call." James nodded, gripping the card tightly. "Thank you for everything." As Tom walked to his unmarked van, he allowed himself a small smile. Through his rearview mirror, he watched Max and his parents standing in the doorway, whole and healing, a sight that made all the sleepless nights worth it. Today, Max is not just surviving. He's thriving. His academic performance has surpassed all expectations. The only remnants of his ordeal are the faintest shimmer of marks on his arms that appear briefly in certain lights, like a memory fading into myth. Have you ever encountered strange insects in your home? What did you do about them? Share your experiences in the comments below.